Yo, it's Jalen back at it again with another video. And in today's video, I'm shirtless because I just got through with a workout, so don't mind that. But this video is going to be on, I guess you can say, sort of pathways that, I guess you could say the most common pathways people take when it comes to transcending the self. And what made me initially think about this was the Lovecraftian mythos. One of the most common, I guess you could say, story points in the Lovecraftian mythos, and it's like a combination of many different stories from many different authors, is like this rivalry between Hastur and Cthulhu. So, Hastur is a character that came about much later on, and like when you think about like the Yellow King and all that, that's Hastur. So he's like this guy or this eldritch deity that whenever like you see his sign, you sort of you go mad, right? You go mad, you see things that you're not supposed to, this, that, and the third. Okay. And his appearance like differs depending on the tale or whatever, but a lot of times he has like a octopus appearance, just like a lot of his siblings, or he has the appearance of like this this yellow robed figure, and he also has like a mask on, this, that, and the third. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Cthulhu, which a lot of us know about Cthulhu. I mean, he's like he's like the first character that you think of when you think of like the Lovecraftian mythos. So with Cthulhu, the thing with Cthulhu is that he resides in R'lyeh. The whole thing where he's sleeping, he's dead, but he's not. And the thing with his followers is that his followers are hedonists. So they are fascinated with the extremes of pleasure, with the extremes of ecstasy, with the extremes of bodily liberation, or just bodily experience, even if you don't want to be really just the extremes of the bodily experience, right? So the reason why the rivalry is so interesting is because the rivalry represents something when it comes to pathways to go beyond the self. And those two common pathways that I was talking about at the beginning of the video are enlightenment and ecstasy, right? So when it comes down to enlightenment is the idea that there's an external thing out there that once you witness it, everything will become clear. The totality of everything will become clear, and you will be able to understand everything, right? That's enlightenment, regardless of the context of where you look at it in whatever tradition, whether you see it in the Eastern tradition or the Western tradition. In the Western tradition, it's more so like there's a God out there, or there's a principle out there that once you understand it, everything will become clear. In the East, it's more so enlightenment is, a process within oneself that once you understand this thing within you, then everything will become clear. But regardless, it's still an external object, right? It's still an out there. Like in the West, it's an out there in regards to like it could be, enlightenment could be like heaven, or enlightenment could be in a platonic sense, enlightenment could be understanding the good. So enlightenment is external in the West. Even in the East, there's an externality to it, because when you're going within yourself, you're chasing a state. There's still something that you're viewing, even though you're within yourself chasing something else, chasing a thing, a state. There's still like a dualistic dynamic between what's going on. Even if at a certain point, you might reach a state of nothingness, that nothingness again is reached through like a dualistic you, and then something else that's going on. Versus of ecstasy is the complete opposite of that, right? Ecstasy is, I'm not chasing something. I'm it's strictly an internal feeling that I'm going through. And the internal feeling that I'm experiencing is to such an extreme, it has reached such a peak to where it's consumed the self and it's replaced it with something else, right? So there is no other object. Other objects are swallowed, and they are swallowed because of the intensity of something else, right? And, to really think about this, we can use examples of these things. So, symbols and art are normal forms of what we would consider as enlightenment, right? People meditate on yantras in order to be enlightened on a subject. Art sort of reveals to you certain ideas and subjects. These things are enlightenment, and these things are external. Versus ecstasy, when you think of ecstasy, again, it's feelings that destroy things. So, there's freaking sadists out there. And, for a sadist, the feeling of inflicting pain on somebody might, that feeling might feel so good to where it cancels out any other thoughts or any other emotions that are going on within that person's head. Vice versa with a masochist. They might like the feeling of pain so much to where whenever they feel pain and they feel agony within themselves, it's blissful. It's to such an extreme to where, it can't compare with anything else that they're um, able to feel. Um, you have sex, like the feeling of becoming one and all that sorts of things. Like a lot of times with ecstasy, like I said, it's very, um, it has a destructive mechanism. So that rivalry can be understood um, when we look at these principles. And it can be understood, why they would hate each other so much, because, you have one guy that is trying to create sort of like a symbol that, sort of places people into another reality, places people into another realm and drives them mad. But then you have another person, and I'm calling them people, but then you have another person that seeks to um, destroy symbols and destroy objects to such a degree to where, there's to where a person has an internal experience that, can't be explained, and that drives them mad. So you have one person that, is trying to place an internal experience into a person that leads them to ecstasy without the need of external objects. And then you have another person that wishes to drive a person away, from themselves, place them into like this relationship with a symbol, and have that be their form of transcendence. So these two people, you would think that, these two principles can't really coincide with each other. But, when you are into magic, and, when you've dabbled into, researching different traditions, and, even doing your own rituals, you realize that to certain degrees and in certain ways they can be complementary, right? An example of this could be sigils, right? So with a sigil, of course, it's a symbol. So it's representing something. So depending on the context, it could be a source of enlightenment. However, the process of, creating that symbol and giving it magical power requires ecstasy. This ecstasy, um, is called it's called gnosis. So you have people that charge sigils using, they might they might masturbate, for instance, or they might have, I've heard things where I've heard like things where a person, they might be having sex with somebody and they'll like have the sigil on the person's back, or they'll have the sigil on the person's body, and they'll shoot it off with with the sigil on the person's body. Like I've heard stories like that. But there's a symbol, but then you also have ecstasy with it too. So I guess with that dynamic, what's happening is you have like this object that exists outside initially, and it's created as a truth. It's created as like this form of beauty, this thing that you wish to attain. Because if you're when you're making a sigil, it's something good. Most of the times, it's something that you want. You might make a sigil for, you might be doing money magic, or you might be doing a sigil to have something go away. It's something that you're very interested in. It's something beautiful. So that's how it is initially, and then at a certain point, once you hit the ecstasy stage, you instead of like with the masochist, again, we talk about the feeling that consumes oneself is inflicting pain on another person. Like, I didn't say the masochist, I meant the sadist, inflicting pain on another person, masochist, feeling pain, this, that, and the third. The state that destroys other objects during sigil charging is the sigil itself, is what the sigil represents, and the emotional intensity of the sigil on reality. However bad you want it, that becomes an emotion, and that becomes a feeling, and you experience that feeling to as high of an intensity as you can within yourself. That's why a lot of people use orgasm to charge their sigils. Not everybody does that. Some people, like myself, I use like passive methods. So like I'll put a sigil somewhere where like I see it every day. So like I'll like if I make a sigil, like I'll draw the sigil on like a whiteboard, or I'll put the sigil on my phone screen, like I got one right now. And I'll have the sigil there. And of course, initially, you know what the sigil is, but after like a couple weeks or a couple months, you forget what that sigil is for. You might remember like how long you need to have it up there, but you forget what it initially is. And that's when you know that, sort of like that process has been completed, right? But even with that, when it becomes unconscious, it can have an ecstasy to it too, because when it's like, if you ever do recall it, it'll like your attention will immediately go to what it is. Like your attention will immediately go to what that sigil is, versus what you're um thinking about, feeling, or memorizing at that time. And again, that's what ecstasy is all about. Ecstasy is something so intense and something so enticing that it puts your perception and your attention on that thing versus anything else occurring inside of you. I don't know what that was, but I think the closest character in the Lovecraft mythos, um, to embody that, I guess, would be In Your Lathotep, but that's just a hypothesis. Um, because like with In Your Lathotep, essentially he just plays around because he's the only character in the mythos that knows the truth of the world, because he's the only character in the mythos that you know views God on an everyday basis. He's the only person that looks at God, every freaking day, because he has to play his instrument to Azathoth or whatever. So I think ecstasy and enlightenment are interesting concepts within Lovecraft. They're interesting concepts when viewed in relation to Hastur and Cthulhu, and they're interesting when viewed in how I guess I can say us as magicians use them in magic, um, because you know it's because again it's important. It can like this can foster a whole bunch of different arguments of um, which one does like which of those two do people find important, and um, what that says about their practice when it comes down to practices. Usually, what practice, I guess, of course, like we already know, like a lot, I guess you could say, like with like a Tantra person, a Tantrist would like ecstasy more. A Neoplatonist would like enlightenment symbols and all that more. So I guess that wouldn't really be argued, but I think really just when I say that, I mean like existentially, which one is more important for the person, and what leads them to saying this is more important to me than um than the other. But I'm not really gonna waste a whole bunch of minutes on this discussion. I think that'll be a lot more. I think it'll be a lot more fruitful to allow y'all to discuss that subject yourselves. Anyways, it's your boy Jalen signing out. Peace.